Memphis, early 1970s. The night air carried the smell of fried food and gasoline as Elvis, dressed down and unnoticed, wandered through the narrow aisles of an old flea market. He wanted nothing more than anonymity, a few quiet minutes among strangers. But then, under the dim glow of a flickering bulb, he saw it. Hanging limply on a rusted hanger, tucked between moth-eaten coats, was a jacket he knew in an instant. His jacket, the olive-green field coat he had worn in Germany as a young soldier, before the world screamed his name, before the stage swallowed him whole. The sight struck like a blow to the chest. The fabric was faded, the seams frayed. But stitched above the pocket was a name that froze him. Presley. It was more than cloth. It was memory. Every cold watch, every tired march, every moment when he wasn't the king, but just another private. Now it dangled here like junk, priced for whoever would haggle hardest. Elvis reached out, fingertips brushing the fabric when the seller looked up. A weary man, eyes shadowed, hands rough. At first, he didn't recognize the customer in front of him, but when he did, his body stiffened, shame flashing across his face, as if he'd been caught exposing a wound. What happened next would stop the market cold, draw a crowd, and reveal truths neither man expected. It wasn't about fame or money or souvenirs. It was about what people carry long after the war ends, and what it takes to give back dignity once it's been lost. Let us know where you're watching from, and we hope you enjoy the story. The Memphis flea market smelled of rust, mothballs, and spilled beer. Rows of wooden tables creaked under piles of objects that once had value for someone. War medals, chipped china, vinyl records in sleeves stained with coffee, children's toys missing wheels. The crowd moved lazily under the heat of the midday sun, every face lined by years of hard living. In that sea of junk and memory, one item drew Elvis's eyes like a magnet. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't gilded or polished. It was an olive-green army jacket, frayed at the cuffs, with faded insignia that once gleamed proud. He knew it instantly, not by sight alone, but by the way his chest tightened when he looked at it. That was his jacket, his own field jacket, the one issued to him in Germany when he was just another private, hair cropped short, boots blistering his feet, with no screaming fans and no spotlight. He froze. For a moment, the crowd noise dulled, as though cotton had been stuffed into his ears. He could hear his own pulse. His mind leapt back to long nights of guard duty, his breath clouding in the European cold, the stiff collar pressed against his neck as he hummed tunes under his breath to stay awake. That jacket had been with him when he was anonymous, when he belonged to something larger than himself, before fame had built walls between him and ordinary life. And now it hung limp from a splintered hanger, tagged with a cardboard sign. Army gear. Cheap. He stepped closer. His hand reached out, trembling before his fingers even brushed the fabric. The cotton was rough, stained faintly by time, carrying a smell of sweat and old smoke. He lifted it from the rack, and the weight of it in his arms was heavier than he remembered, not from the fabric, but from what it carried back into him. "Looking for something, mister?" The voice was hoarse, scratched by cigarettes and years of hardship. Elvis turned his head. The vendor was a man in his late 30s, maybe 40s. Though hardship made it difficult to tell. His hair was unkempt, streaked with gray. His frame leaned to the point of hollow. He leaned on the table as though it alone kept him upright. At first, Elvis only studied the man, still clutching the jacket to his chest. Something flickered in the man's eyes. A memory, or perhaps only suspicion. Then he looked away, muttering to himself, arranging a few rusted canteens on the table. Elvis spoke softly, almost afraid of the answer. "Where'd you get this?" The man gave a dry laugh, like gravel being turned in a pan. "Picked it up through some folks I know, storage lots, old army stock. You know how it is. Stuff nobody wants ends up floating around." He shrugged, trying to appear casual, but his eyes darted to the jacket again, and then to Elvis's face. The longer he looked, the paler he grew. His jaw tightened. He opened his mouth, closed it, and then tried again. "Wait, Lord Almighty, it can't be. You're—" His voice cracked. "You're him." The words spread like electricity. A couple nearby shoppers glanced over, their expressions shifting as they connected the dots. A murmur started, faint at first, but swelling like a tide. "Is that Elvis?" one woman whispered. Children tugged at their parents' sleeves, trying to push closer. The vendor's hand trembled. He wiped his palms on his pants, eyes darting around as if searching for an exit. He took a half-step back, nearly knocking over a box of bent silverware. His breathing quickened, the shallow gasp of a man cornered. Elvis didn't move. He just stood there, jacket cradled in his arms, looking at the man. Not as a celebrity confronting a fan, but as one soldier recognizing another. Because now he remembered him. The lines of his face were older, harsher, but there was no mistaking it. They had served together. Germany. Long nights in the barracks, voices trading stories, laughter echoing against the walls even when loneliness pressed in. The shock that had first gripped Elvis's chest now deepened into something heavier. Sorrow. How had this man ended up here, hawking scraps in a flea market while trembling at the sight of someone he once knew? The crowd's whisper grew louder, cameras flashing, the shuffle of shoes pressing closer. Yet Elvis couldn't take his eyes off him. The vendor's lips trembled as he whispered, "I didn't mean for you to see it, man. I didn't know it'd end up like this." His voice cracked. And he gripped the edge of the table as though it might steady him. The jacket weighed heavier still in Elvis's arms. Memories collided. Parades of screaming crowds, the endless spotlight, the grinding schedule of tours. And beneath it all, the quiet years in uniform, where men were brothers and every face was equal under the same dirt and cold. This was more than cloth. This was the life he had once lived, the humility he had sworn never to forget. And now it had surfaced here, in the hands of someone who once walked beside him, battered by a war that had broken too many. The murmurs in the market softened into a strange hush as Elvis raised the jacket, staring at it as if reading its every crease. The vendor looked down, ashamed, shuffling his feet. He whispered something under his breath, too low for anyone else, but Elvis heard it. "Didn't think you'd remember me." The silence that followed was not empty. It was thick, charged, heavy with what no one dared to say aloud. The smell of rust and sweat hung in the air. Elvis closed his eyes for the briefest moment, and when he opened them, he felt both the sting of the past and the burden of what lay ahead. In his hands was not just a jacket, it was a mirror. The man's fingers twitched against the edge of the table, the knuckles pale from strain. He seemed to shrink as the people around leaned closer, as if their eyes alone could burn through him. Elvis still held the jacket, his thumb brushing against the seam where the fabric had frayed. The silence between them stretched until Elvis spoke again, his voice low, steady, yet edged with demand. "How did this end up here?" The vendor's throat moved, but no sound came at first. His gaze slipped to the ground, darting across cigarette butts and discarded receipts scattered in the dirt. Finally, he forced out a laugh, brittle and false. "Does it matter? It's just an old piece of cloth. Nobody wants it except collectors, and they don't care where it came from." Elvis didn't blink. His stare pressed harder than any word. "It matters to me." The vendor's lips parted, then closed. He licked them nervously, sweat darkening the collar of his shirt. "All right," he muttered, voice breaking down. "All right, I'll tell you." He leaned closer, lowering his tone as though trying to hide the confession from the growing circle of strangers. "It came through a buddy of mine. He used to work where they stored soldiers' gear after discharge. You know, lockers, crates, things left behind. Said there was a whole pile tagged for disposal, and he pulled a few pieces out. I bought some off him." Didn't know whose they were till later. The words cut deeper than the man probably intended. Elvis felt a rush of anger. Someone had pawed through the fragments of lives, reducing them to surplus stock. But beneath the anger lay something sharper: betrayal. That his own belongings, symbols of a time when he was stripped of fame and simply another uniform, had been scavenged like scraps. "And you kept this one?" Elvis asked, his grip tightening on the jacket. The vendor gave a small nod, shame coating every movement. His voice cracked again, hesitant, like he was bearing something he had hidden for years. "I had other things. Boots, a cap, even your dog tags once. Thought about selling them to those rich collectors who'll pay for anything with your name on it. But I couldn't bring myself to do it. Not with this jacket. This one. It felt different." I held on to it. Elvis's jaw clenched. "Why?" The man's eyes darted up, then away, unable to hold the gaze. He rubbed the back of his neck, his shoulders hunched. "Because back then, back in Germany, you weren't Elvis Presley, the superstar. You were just one of us. Ate the same chow, scrubbed the same floors, took the same orders. You didn't look down on anyone. And this jacket?" He swallowed hard. "It reminded me that at least for a while, everyone was equal. Even me." The marketplace had grown restless. People whispered, exchanged glances, tugged at their children's arms to pull them closer for a better look. Some were grinning at the drama unfolding, others simply curious. A few teenagers laughed quietly, snapping photos with cheap cameras, unaware of the weight in the exchange. Elvis's insides twisted. His first instinct was fury. The thought that his past had been stolen, tossed into this circus of onlookers. But then, as he studied the man's trembling, Elvis stood still, jacket draped over his arm, watching the man's hands fidget as though they could dig him an escape route from the dirt beneath their feet. The air between them carried a tension that felt almost visible, thick, vibrating, impossible to step through without cutting yourself. The vendor's words still hung in the space. The jacket was his reminder of equality, a relic of days when rank and fame hadn't mattered. Elvis inhaled slowly, the smell of sweat, gasoline from a nearby food cart, and the old cotton of the jacket filling his lungs. He could have ended it right there, offered a wad of bills, taken back the jacket, and left. That would have been the easiest choice, the one that fit the crowd's expectations. But something in the man's eyes, something hollow and tired, pulled him back from that impulse. He shifted closer, lowering his voice just enough to cut under the hum of the gathering crowd. "Tell me what happened after the service." The vendor's face flickered with confusion, then resistance. His lips pressed tight, and he shook his head. "Ain't nothing worth telling, just a lot of bad luck, bad choices." But Elvis didn't move. His eyes stayed locked, steady as a hand on a rifle grip. The silence stretched until it cracked the man's defenses. He exhaled, shoulders sagging. "Vietnam," he muttered. "I shipped out after Germany. Thought I'd come back proud. Thought maybe people would clap for us, like they did in the old wars." He laughed bitterly, shaking his head. "But nobody wanted to see us, not when we came home. No parades, no flags, just stares, just silence." His voice grew tighter with every word, as though the memory choked him from the inside. "I came back with this leg busted up and a head that won't stop ringing. Couldn't keep a steady job. Nights, I wake up sweating, thinking I'm still out there. And folks don't care. They just don't want to look at you." Elvis's grip on the jacket tightened, the fabric wrinkling under his fingers. The words stirred his own memories, not of combat, but of the barracks, of men with tired eyes, of whispered prayers before lights out. He could picture this same man, younger, whole, laughing with his comrades under the dull glow of fluorescent bulbs. To see him now, reduced to a stall in a noisy market, was like staring at a ghost that refused to fade. The vendor's voice faltered, softer now, as though he were speaking only to himself. That jacket was the only thing I kept. I wore it sometimes when I needed to remember who I used to be, when I still believed in something bigger. But debts pile up. I can't eat memories. So I thought, maybe it's worth something to someone else. Around them, the market crowd had swelled. Faces pressed forward, some eager, some mocking. A woman whispered to her friend, pointing, "He's buying his own stuff back?" A young man chuckled, "Figures, guy's so rich he'll pay anything." A child tugged at his mother's sleeve, eyes wide at the sight of the man who'd once made the world shake with a single song. The murmur turned restless, like the low growl of an approaching storm. Some were there for spectacle, others for sentiment, but none of them understood the weight pressing on Elvis's shoulders. To them, it was drama. To him, it was a reckoning. He looked again at the vendor. His hands trembled as he tried to steady himself with a half-empty box of brass buckles. His eyes darted to the ground, then to the side, ashamed to meet Elvis's. The fragility in his posture, the resignation in his voice, it all spoke louder than the words themselves. Elvis felt a rush of conflicting fire, anger at the injustice of a man discarded, sorrow at the sight of someone he once knew beaten down by circumstance, and the gnawing awareness that anything he said or did now would echo beyond this moment. The cameras in the crowd glinted like watchful eyes. A man lifted a small Super 8 camera to his shoulder, winding it, the reel beginning to spin. This wasn't just a private exchange anymore. Every breath, every movement could be twisted into a headline, a rumor, a story stripped of truth. Elvis could sense it, the way the air itself changed when too many people leaned in. The vendor's voice cracked again, barely audible under the hum of gossip. "I shouldn't have brought it here. Should have just kept it or burned it." Elvis leaned closer, his voice quiet but sharp. "No, don't you ever think that. Burning it wouldn't fix a damn thing. That jacket's not just yours or mine. It's every man who put one on and came back forgotten." For a moment, the vendor's eyes lifted. There was moisture there, half rage, half despair, half something harder to name. His lips trembled, as if he wanted to answer but couldn't find the words. The crowd's murmur surged again. Someone shouted for an autograph, another demanded Elvis sing. A burst of laughter came from the back, cruel and careless. The vendor flinched, mistaking the sound as aimed at him. His shoulders hunched tighter, his chest rising fast, the look of a cornered animal ready to bolt. Elvis's pulse pounded. He could feel the choice forming inside him. He could lash out, storm away, let anger dictate the next step. Or he could do something else, something that would hold back the tide pressing in on them both. His mind flicked back, unbidden, to a night long ago. The barracks dark, the sound of boots creaking on wooden floors, laughter echoing against thin walls, and this same man's voice calling out a joke that had left everyone in stitches. They had been boys then, equal in every way. Now one wore sequins and stood on world stages. The other sold scraps on a folding table. The distance between those fates felt unbearable. Elvis swallowed hard. His voice, when it came, was rough, but steady. "We're not done talking. Not here. Not like this." The words hung heavy, charged with decision, as the noise of the crowd swelled around them, threatening to tip this fragile moment into chaos. The noise of the market swelled into something almost unbearable. 100 voices overlapping, the scrape of shoes against gravel, the sharp clicks of camera shutters. The circle around them had grown tight, people craning their necks, some standing on crates to see better. A woman lifted her child so he could glimpse over the shoulders in front of him. Somewhere in the back, a man shouted Elvis's name like a war cry, and the sound rippled through the crowd until dozens of whispers confirmed it. Elvis Presley was here, right now, holding an old army jacket. Children darted forward, trying to squeeze between adults. A young boy in a baseball cap clutched a scrap of paper, desperate for an autograph. A woman held up a Kodak Instamatic, flashbulb already primed. The air buzzed with the kind of excitement that could tilt in any direction: adoration, mockery, or chaos. But at the center of it all, Elvis barely moved. The jacket hung in his hands, its dull olive cloth a sharp contrast against the rhinestone shimmer of the shirt he wore. He looked down at it, then up at the man across from him. The vendor shifted uneasily, shoulders rigid, eyes darting left and right. His breathing had turned ragged, shallow, as if every camera flash stripped another layer of skin away. Then came the faint whir of machinery. Someone had pulled out a portable film camera. The reel spun, capturing every second. Elvis felt it before he saw it, the shift in the air when privacy disintegrated. This wasn't just between two men anymore. One wrong look, one careless word, and tomorrow's headlines would twist it into scandal. The vendor's face hardened, his jaw clenched, his mouth thin with anger or fear, or both. He took a step back, bumping against the corner of his table. A tin canteen rolled off and clattered to the ground. Heads turned at the sound, and a few people laughed. The man's eyes flashed, humiliated. He muttered under his breath, "I can't do this. Not with them staring." He turned, ready to push through the crowd. But before he could take another step, Elvis reached out. His hand landed on the man's shoulder, not forceful, not possessive, but firm enough to halt him. "Stay," Elvis said, his tone calm but carrying a weight that silenced even the nearest onlookers. The vendor froze. His chest rose and fell rapidly, the rise of panic still visible, but something in the steadiness of Elvis's voice cut through it. Slowly, almost reluctantly, he turned back. His eyes flicked toward the ground, unwilling to meet Elvis's. The crowd, sensing the tension, shifted again. Some leaned closer, hoping to catch every word. Others whispered harsh judgments about the vendor, curious why this man of all people stood in the center of attention with Elvis Presley. To them, it was spectacle. To him, it was exposure, raw and merciless. Elvis spoke again, his voice carrying just enough to reach the man but not the whole circle of strangers. "Don't let them decide this moment for you." The vendor swallowed hard, lips pressed tight, shame etched deep in the lines of his face. The hum of the market pressed down on them, loud yet strangely hollow, like a tide that threatened to drown out anything meaningful. The cameras flashed again, bright bursts that momentarily blinded. A few children giggled, sensing only the strangeness of the scene. A teenager muttered to his friend, "Bet he's buying it for a fortune." Laughter rippled through a small pocket of the crowd, sharp as glass. The vendor flinched, his fists clenched at his sides as though bracing against invisible blows. To him, every laugh belonged to his failure, every whisper a reminder of how far he had fallen. His voice cracked under the strain. "They think I'm a joke. I can't stand here like some exhibit." Elvis didn't release his shoulder. His hand remained steady, quiet strength in its grip. He lowered his tone, each word deliberate. "You're not a joke. You're a soldier. You stood where others couldn't. Don't let a crowd take that from you." The words landed like a lifeline, though the vendor's face still fought to believe them. All around, the contrast was stark. The roar of voices, the hungry eyes of strangers, the greedy pull of cameras desperate for a headline, against the quiet, unyielding exchange between two men at the center. The chaos wanted spectacle. Elvis offered dignity. And yet he knew, even as he spoke, that this moment had already slipped beyond his control. It was no longer theirs alone. Whatever happened here would live beyond today. In film reels, in photographs, in whispered retellings across Memphis and beyond. He felt the inevitability of it, and it pressed heavily on him. Still, Elvis tightened his grip on the jacket in one hand, the vendor's shoulder under the other, as though anchoring them both. The crowd might demand a scene, but he would not let it swallow this man whole. For a heartbeat, the market quieted, the murmur dipping low. Even the camera's whir seemed distant. Elvis's voice, calm but unwavering, slipped through the noise like a steady current. "Stay with me. Don't walk away." The vendor's chest heaved, torn between shame and the faint glimmer of trust. His eyes flicked up, meeting Elvis's for the briefest second, before falling away again. It wasn't agreement, not yet, but it wasn't escape either. The crowd stirred, restless at the silence, hungry for whatever would come next. And Elvis knew. The choice he made now would shape not only this man's fate, but the story that every bystander carried out of this market. The noise around them throbbed like a swarm. Children laughed, men shouted, women pressed forward with cameras ready, but Elvis didn't let go of the man's shoulder. He leaned close, his voice pitched low, almost private, though the crowd strained to catch it. "Let's step aside," Elvis said. The vendor hesitated, eyes flicking toward the cameras, then toward the jacket still clutched against Elvis's chest. For a moment he looked ready to resist. But something in Elvis's steady gaze cut through his panic. With a reluctant nod, he let himself be guided a few steps away, into the shadow of a nearby wall where the crowd couldn't press so tightly. Still, dozens of faces angled toward them, the hum of gossip never fading. In the shade, the air felt cooler. The man rubbed his hands together, nervous energy spilling from every gesture. His lips worked soundlessly before he managed words. "Why are you doing this? You don't owe me nothing. You don't owe anybody nothing." Elvis studied him carefully. The faint scars on his cheek, the tired grooves around his mouth. His own reflection seemed hidden there, what he might have become if fate had twisted differently. "Maybe I don't," Elvis replied. "But I want to know. Tell me what kept you going out there. Why hold on to this jacket when you could have taken the money and run?" The vendor let out a short laugh, bitter and breathless. "You wouldn't understand." "Try me." The man's eyes shifted, uncertain. Then, with a sigh, he dug into the pocket of his worn jacket. His fingers fumbled before producing a small cassette player, the kind soldiers had carried in rucksacks during long nights on patrol. The plastic was cracked, the play button held together by a strip of tape. He held it out. "This, we'd huddle around it in the dark, waiting for dawn or waiting for trouble. Someone always had a tape of yours. Heartbreak Hotel. Love Me Tender." Didn't matter which. We'd play 'em soft, barely loud enough to hear. Kept us sane, kept us feeling like maybe the world wasn't all mud and fire. Elvis stared at the cassette player, the scratches reflecting sunlight. His throat tightened. He thought of his own nights overseas. Different war. Same longing for home, for connection, for anything that tethered you to life. The vendor's voice cracked as he went on. "We called your songs our lucky charm. My buddy Jenkins swore he'd never make it through without hearing you sing. Said your voice was the only thing reminding him there was something worth living for. One night he made me promise to keep the tape playing if he didn't make it back. He didn't." Silence followed. The vendor rubbed at his eyes roughly, as if angry at himself for showing weakness. "So yeah, maybe I bought this jacket because it belonged to the same guy whose voice pulled us through. It felt like proof that we weren't forgotten." Elvis's chest ached. He wanted to speak, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he placed a hand on the battered cassette player, pressing it gently back toward the man. "You should keep this." The vendor let out a shaky breath, his eyes fixed on the ground. "I thought about holding on to the jacket too, for the memories. But debts don't care about memories. Landlords don't care either." He shook his head, voice raw. "I didn't want to sell it, but hunger makes choices for you." For a moment, neither man spoke. The din of the crowd carried faintly, the crackle of laughter and the click of more cameras. But here, in the shade, a fragile stillness held. Elvis studied the cassette player again, the way the man's thumb stroked the tape deck like it was a relic. "You're not forgotten," Elvis said finally, his voice thick. "Not to me, not to anyone who wore this uniform." The vendor glanced up, startled. His eyes shone wet, though he quickly blinked it away. You talk like you still believe in all that brotherhood stuff. World's different now. Folks don't care what we went through. Elvis's gaze hardened. But there was no anger in it. Only conviction. Then maybe we have to remind him. The man let out another hollow laugh, but his shoulders loosened slightly, as if the weight of the jacket in Elvis's hands had shifted something in him. He tucked the cassette player back into his pocket and muttered, "You sound like we're still standing in formation." "Maybe we are," Elvis said. His voice was quiet, but in it lay a promise the vendor hadn't expected. The crowd outside the shadow clamored louder, sensing that something was happening beyond their reach. But here, for a fleeting moment, the noise faded to background. Two men, bound by years in uniforms, stood in fragile trust, the jacket between them no longer just cloth, but a symbol of everything both had carried: honor, loss, survival. And for the first time since this confrontation began, the vendor didn't look like he wanted to flee. He looked like he wanted to believe. The stillness in the shaded corner could not last. From beyond the wall of bodies came the growing rumble of voices, a restless tide that demanded spectacle. They were no longer satisfied with whispers. They wanted a moment to remember, something to boast about later. I saw Elvis at the market, and this is what he did. Elvis sensed it, the way pressure built in a crowd, until silence itself became unbearable. He knew he couldn't let the story end in secrecy. Too many eyes were already fixed on them, too many cameras poised. This wasn't just between him and the broken man in front of him anymore. It belonged, for better or worse, to everyone gathered there. He stepped out from the shade, tugging the vendor with him, still gripping the man's shoulder. The crowd shifted instantly, parting just enough to make space. Dozens of faces lit up, hungry. Elvis raised the jacket high for all to see, the faded fabric catching the sunlight like a flag. "This," he said, his voice rising above the murmur, "isn't just a piece of clothing. It belonged to me once, sure, but it could have belonged to any man here who served, any man who gave his years, his blood, his peace of mind." The chatter dipped, the words rippling outward, pulling attention tight. For the first time, people truly listened. Elvis continued, his voice steady. "It's easy to cheer when the music's playing, easy to clap when the lights are on. But what about when the music stops? What about the ones who come back to empty rooms and quiet streets? Who cheers for them?" The vendor stared at the ground, his shoulders tense under Elvis's hand. The crowd shifted uneasily, glances traded, whispers softer now. Some lowered their cameras. Then, from the far side of the circle, a sharp voice cut through. "Easy for you to say, Presley. You're rich. You've got the world bowing at your feet. What do you know about being forgotten?" The words hung in the air like a slap. Gasps scattered through the crowd. Some craned their necks to see who had spoken. A tall man in a work shirt smirked, arms folded, daring Elvis to answer. For a heartbeat, the market held its breath. Elvis didn't flinch. He turned his head slowly, eyes locking with the hecklers. The silence stretched so long that the tension itself became painful. Then Elvis spoke, calm as steel. "You think money erases memory? You think applause fills the nights when I lie awake remembering the boys I left behind? Fame don't buy peace, and it sure don't buy honor." The words were not shouted. They were spoken with such quiet force that they cut sharper than any yell. The man in the work shirt opened his mouth, then shut it again, shifting awkwardly under the stares of the crowd. Elvis let the silence linger before turning back. His eyes swept the faces before him, children clutching their mothers' hands, men with lines carved deep from labor, women pressing kerchiefs against their foreheads in the heat. He lowered the old army jacket, then, without hesitation, slid it over one arm and draped it across the vendor's shoulders. The fabric sagged heavily, but it fit as though it belonged there. The vendor stiffened, eyes wide, lips parting in disbelief. "What are you?" Elvis cut him off gently, voice just loud enough to carry. "You carried burdens no man should carry alone. This jacket was mine once, but today it belongs to you, and through you, to every soldier this country forgot." A ripple ran through the crowd. No one clapped at first. The act was too raw, too startling in its simplicity. Then a single pair of hands struck together, hesitant but genuine. Another joined. Soon the applause spread, louder, stronger, until it roared through the market like thunder rolling across open fields. The vendor's eyes brimmed, though he turned his face away, ashamed of the wetness streaking his cheeks. His hands clutched the jacket's lapels, gripping them as though they were lifelines. Elvis stepped back, letting the man stand in the center of the circle. No spotlight, no stage, just a battered veteran draped in a symbol that now spoke louder than any song could. The applause didn't sound like adoration for Elvis this time. It sounded like recognition for the man beside him. For the first time in years, the vendor wasn't invisible. Elvis let the sound wash over them, not as a performance, but as a reckoning. He knew the cameras would carry this image beyond the market, beyond Memphis, maybe further. But for once, he didn't care how the headlines twisted it. What mattered was the look on the man's face, the shock, the disbelief, the faint spark of dignity returning where shame had lived too long. And as the applause rolled on, Elvis thought, "This moment isn't mine anymore, it's his." The roar of clapping had not yet faded when a new sound rose above it, the scratch of a pen on paper. A man pushed forward through the crowd, leather satchel bouncing against his hip, glasses sliding down the bridge of his nose. He carried himself with the brisk confidence of someone who believed every scene existed to be written down. "Name's Carter," he announced, more to the onlookers than to Elvis. "Memphis Gazette." His notebook was already open, his pencil darting across the page as though the words could not wait for breath. He positioned himself just within reach, angling for the best line of sight. The vendor shrank back instinctively, pulling the jacket tighter across his shoulders. His eyes flicked toward the exits of the market, but the crush of bodies left no path. He looked cornered again, the faint dignity he had gained moments ago teetering. Carter's pencil paused. He glanced up at the man with a smile that was far too sharp. "Sir, I'd like a word. Folks here say you've had a rough go since you came back. Stories about drinking, about debts you never paid. Care to tell Memphis why you're standing here now, wrapped in another man's coat?" The words landed like stones. The vendor's face drained of color, his lips parting soundlessly. He stammered once, twice, before turning away, shoulders hunched. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, the same kind of hungry whisper that rises when people smell scandal. Elvis stepped forward before the man could retreat further. His presence alone shifted the air. Broad shoulders squared, chin lifted, gaze sharp enough to slice through glass. He faced Carter directly. "That what you came for? Dirt? Easy lines to sell more papers?" Carter blinked, but his pencil scratched again, quick strokes capturing every word. "Mr. Presley, the public has a right to know who this man is. If he's burdened with debts, if he's struggled with the bottle, isn't it fair to ask?" "Fair?" Elvis's voice cut clean, no need for volume. "You call it fair to dig through a man's wounds in front of strangers? You call it fair to drag him lower when he's already crawling through hell?" The market fell into a hush. Even the children quieted, sensing the electricity in the air. Carter shifted, his mouth opening to reply, but Elvis raised a hand, steady, commanding silence. "You ask about debts," Elvis continued, his tone steady but edged with steel. "Where were you when he came home limping and broken? Where were you when he lay awake nights listening for gunfire that wasn't there? Where were you when this country turned its back on the boys it sent to fight?" No one moved. The only sound was the faint buzz of a neon sign from a food stand across the lot. Carter's pencil hovered in the air, stalled. His cheeks flushed pink behind his glasses. Elvis took one step closer, closing the space between them. His words, though quiet. carried with the weight of conviction. "You want a story? Here it is. This man served his country. He bled for it. He came back to nothing, and still he's here, standing when plenty would have fallen. That's the story you write. Not the bottle, not the bills. Write that he's still here." The vendor's eyes brimmed again, but this time he didn't turn away. His jaw trembled, his hands gripping the jacket tighter. He looked at Elvis with something like disbelief. Disbelief that anyone, let alone the king of rock and roll, would stand in front of him like a shield. The crowd shifted uneasily. Some looked down, ashamed. Others nodded, faces softening, as if Elvis's words had peeled back a layer of indifference they hadn't realized they carried. A few began to clap again, tentative at first, then firmer, until the applause swelled louder than before. Carter lowered his pencil slowly. His notebook remained open, but the cocky certainty had drained from his expression. He muttered something under his breath, scribbled a final line, and stepped back into the mass of onlookers, swallowed by their bodies. Elvis stayed where he was, his gaze sweeping the crowd. "Don't clap for me," he said firmly. "Clap for him." The people obeyed. The sound rose like a wave, rolling over the marketplace. Heads turned toward the vendor, not with mockery this time, but with respect, perhaps even guilt. Mothers pointed him out to their children. Men nodded solemnly as if acknowledging a fellow worker after a long shift. The vendor's shoulders shook. He pressed his lips together, fighting the emotion clawing its way up. For the first time in years, he wasn't invisible, wasn't dismissed. For the first time, people were looking at him without turning away. Elvis glanced back at him, eyes soft now, the edge replaced with quiet assurance. He gave the faintest nod, as if to say, "You don't have to stand alone anymore." And in that moment, the market was no longer just a place for trading scraps. It was a witness stand, and the verdict had shifted, from shame to recognition, from mockery to dignity. The clapping lingered in the hot air like an echo that refused to fade. The vendor stood frozen at its center, shoulders hunched, as though the sound itself might collapse onto him. For years he had learned to blend into corners, to walk with his head low so eyes would pass over him. Now every gaze in the marketplace was fixed squarely on him, not with ridicule but with recognition, and it terrified him more than the laughter ever had. He tugged at the jacket Elvis had placed around him, fingers curling into the worn fabric as if afraid it might vanish. His lips parted, struggling to form words, but none came. Elvis stepped closer, lowering his voice again so only the man could hear. "You don't have to go back to being alone after this. Come with me. Let me help you find your feet again." The vendor's head jerked up, eyes wide. "What? No, I can't." He shook his head hard, panic sharp in his voice. "I ain't some charity case you can parade around. Folks'll laugh harder than ever." Elvis's expression didn't change. He kept his tone even, solid as bedrock. "This isn't about charity. It's about giving you a chance to stand again, work, dignity, something to hold on to besides ghosts." The man let out a short, broken laugh. "You don't get it. I don't deserve that. I drank through jobs. I let people down. I failed." His voice cracked, and he turned half away, hiding the moisture in his eyes. Elvis didn't flinch. "You didn't fail. The world failed you. You gave what you had to give, and when you came home, they turned their backs. That's not on you." The vendor's shoulders shook, the fight draining out of him. "Still," he muttered, almost pleading, "I don't belong in your world. You got stages, lights, people cheering. Me? I got debt collectors and nights where I can't close my eyes without hearing gunfire. You don't want that following you." Elvis took a slow breath. He thought of the endless hotel rooms, the screaming crowds that never knew silence, the weight of being seen, but not understood. Different demons, but demons all the same. "You think I don't know what it means to be haunted? You think the lights make it easier. They don't. But what I do know is this. You don't fight shadows alone. You need someone beside you, and right now, I'm standin' here." The vendor's lips trembled. His fists opened and closed, a man wrestling with chains only he could see. The crowd had grown quiet again, sensing the gravity of the exchange. Even the children stopped squirming, eyes wide. The cameras still pointed, but no one dared interrupt. Finally, the man whispered, hoarse and low, "I can't pay you back?" Elvis shook his head. "I'm not asking for money. I'm asking you to keep something that matters more." He tapped the jacket still draped across the man's shoulders. "Keep this. Don't sell it. Don't pawn it off. Let it remind you who you are. Not forgotten, not discarded. A soldier, a brother." The man's throat worked. Words stuck. Tears slipped despite his effort to hold them back. He turned his face away again, ashamed. But Elvis reached out, lightly gripping his arm, not pulling, just anchoring. "You came back from a war that broke thousands, and you're still standing here. That alone makes you worth more than you'll ever admit. Let me give you more than applause. Let me give you a way forward." The crowd watched, silent witnesses. Some clutched their own chests, as if the weight of Elvis's words pressed on them too. Others bowed their heads, guilt flickering in their eyes. A woman wiped at her cheeks with the corner of her apron. The vendor shook his head again, but the fight in him had dulled. His voice cracked on every word. "I don't know if I can." "You can," Elvis said, steady as stone. "Not alone, but with help, you can. You kept my voice close to you in the jungle, through the fire. Let me keep yours close now." The man's breath hitched, ragged. For a moment he looked at Elvis, truly looked, and in that gaze was a mixture of disbelief, longing, and the faintest spark of hope. His lips pressed together, but he didn't argue again. The silence between them stretched, fragile, while the crowd held its breath. Then Elvis spoke once more, simple and firm. "Come with me." The man didn't answer. He only clutched the jacket tighter, tears streaking the dust on his face. But for the first time since this day began, he didn't try to run. And that small act, staying, was the beginning of something larger than either of them had planned. By the next morning, the story had already taken root across Memphis, not in the form of gossip or scandal, as some might have expected, but as something heavier, more human. The Memphis Gazette ran a column with a grainy photograph snapped at the market. Elvis Presley draping a faded army jacket across the shoulders of a man with a lined face and hollow eyes. The headline read simply, "A Forgotten Soldier Remembered." Smaller papers picked it up within hours. By noon, the picture was pasted in diner windows and barber shops, taped above cash registers at gas stations. Strangers leaned across counters to talk about it. For once, the story wasn't about Elvis's music, his fortune, or his fame. It was about what people had seen with their own eyes. A superstar pausing in a crowded market to stand beside a man everyone else had overlooked. At first, the veteran himself resisted the sudden attention. He kept his head low, flinching when people recognized him. But something had shifted. A local group that helped returning servicemen reached out. Within a week, he had steady work sorting supplies in their warehouse. It wasn't glamorous, but it was a rhythm, a purpose, a paycheck. For a man who had spent years drifting, it was a return to ground. Neighbors who once crossed the street to avoid him began nodding in greeting. A woman at the corner store asked if he needed help carrying groceries. Even the landlord who once threatened eviction eased his tone, giving him time to settle his debts. Respect had returned. Not in grand gestures, but in small mercies that made life livable again. And through it all, the jacket never left his side. He wore it sometimes, walking to work in the cool mornings. Other times he folded it carefully and laid it across the back of a chair, a reminder that dignity could be restored. For Elvis, the marketplace encounter became a shadow that followed him into every rehearsal, every night on the road. He couldn't shake the image of the man's trembling hands, the disbelief in his eyes. To Elvis, the jacket had ceased to be his alone. It had become a symbol of something larger, something he carried with him into his music. That truth came to life one evening, weeks later, under the hot lights of a Memphis concert hall. The crowd was restless, packed shoulder to shoulder, the air thick with cigarette smoke and perfume. The roar, when Elvis stepped on stage, shook the rafters. But when the band paused between songs, he didn't launch into the next number. Instead, he held up his hand, waiting until the noise settled into a hush. A stagehand walked out carrying a box. From it, Elvis lifted the very same olive green jacket, its seams worn, its fabric faded by years of use. He held it high so every person in the hall could see. The audience stirred. Murmurs of recognition rippled like wind through wheat. Cameras flashed. People leaned forward, sensing that what was about to happen was not part of the set list. Elvis's voice, when he finally spoke, carried none of the performer's showmanship. It was stripped bare, the voice of a man rather than a star. "This jacket was mine once," he said, his accent thick, his words measured. "I wore it when I was just another soldier. Back then, there wasn't no stage, no spotlight, just cold nights and long duty. But it doesn't belong to me anymore. Not really." He paused, scanning the sea of faces. Some were already glistening with tears. "It belongs to every man who put one on and came home to silence. Every man who walked these streets invisible, carrying battles you couldn't see. Last week I met one of those men right here in Memphis. A man this country forgot. But I tell you tonight, he ain't forgotten anymore. Not by me, and not by you." The hall erupted, not with the wild screams Elvis had known for years, but with something deeper. Applause thundered, people rising to their feet in unison. The sound was not adoration but solidarity, the kind of applause that carried weight, that acknowledged more than a performer. Elvis lowered the jacket slowly, his eyes burning with intensity. "This ain't just cloth. It's memory. It's sacrifice. Tonight, it don't stand for me. It stands for us all." He placed the jacket on a stand beside the microphone, not as a prop, but as a monument. Then he turned back to the band, gave a simple nod, and let the music roll again. But even as the guitars swelled and the drums pounded, the crowd's gaze kept flicking back to the jacket. It stood in the spotlight, silent yet louder than any song. A reminder of the man at the marketplace, of the tears he had tried to hide, of the dignity restored to him in front of strangers. That night, people left the hall speaking not just of the music, but of the meaning. They told the story to their children, repeated it at kitchen tables and factory floors. Elvis gave his jacket to a forgotten soldier. He said it belonged to all of us. And in that retelling, the moment stretched beyond Memphis, beyond Elvis. It became what he had hoped, a symbol that memory could survive, that compassion could outshine spectacle, that one act of recognition could ripple outward until it touched a whole city. For the veteran, life remained hard, but no longer hopeless. For Elvis, the marketplace encounter became part of his own story, not as another headline, but as proof that fame could still be used to serve something greater than applause. And for everyone who saw it, whether in person or in the papers, the old jacket was never just cloth again. It was a mirror of who they had forgotten, and a promise that forgetting would no longer be so easy.